Hello, my name is Paul Geyer, and I'm here today to share with you another of the exciting Eat and Learn professional ethics programs offered by the Clubhouse Press for professional engineers, architects, and construction managers. Today we will be talking about ethical issues arising from the collapse of the St. Francis Dam in California. This is what we will be talking about today, the chapters in the book, so to speak. Here is a little bit about me and what I've been doing for the last few decades. At 11:56 p.m. on March 12, 1928, the concrete arch St. Francis Dam was a key element of the Los Angeles aqueduct. It was designed and constructed by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Water and Power to create a reservoir to store water brought via the aqueduct from the Owens Valley in east central California to serve the burgeoning city of Los Angeles. It was a concrete gravity arch dam located about 40 miles northwest of Los Angeles on San Francisquito Creek near the present-day city of Santa Clarita, California. At 11:57 p.m., it collapsed catastrophically, releasing 12 billion gallons of water downstream that reached a depth of 140 feet with average velocities estimated at 26 feet per second. By 5:30 a.m. on March 13th, floodwaters reached the Pacific Ocean at Montalvo near Ventura, California. The flood killed more than 450 people and was the worst civil engineering failure in U.S. history. This is the St. Francis Dam before it collapsed. This is a view of the reservoir behind the dam. Construction of the St. Francis Dam was begun in 1924. Shortly after construction had begun, it was decided to raise the height of the dam 10 feet, which would increase the storage capacity of the reservoir from 30,000 to 32,000 acre-feet. This height increase was adopted with only minor changes in the dam's design to accommodate the additional height, particularly with no increase in the width of the dam base. In 1925, when construction was about 50% complete, a decision was made to increase the height of the dam an additional 10 feet to 195 feet, thereby increasing the reservoir's storage capacity to more than 38,000 acre-feet. The dam's new height increase required construction of a dike along the top of the ridge of the western abutment to prevent water from spilling over the ridge. Again, there was no increase in the width of the dam base. Throughout 1926 and 1927, temperature and contraction cracks, in some cases with accompanying leakage, appeared in the dam as the reservoir filled. The cracks and leaks were inspected and judged to be within expectation for a concrete dam the size of the St. Francis. From late 1927 to March 1928, the reservoir filled steadily and without incident. In March, the reservoir reached full capacity and the initial filling was concluded. In the same month, however, travelers on the road along the east shore of the reservoir reported cracks and a sagging in the roadbed near the dam's east abutment. On the morning of March 12th, the dam keeper discovered a substantive leak, reported it to LA Department of Water and Power Management, and the leak was inspected by LA Department of Water and Power, and it was concluded the leak was relatively minor and normal for a concrete dam, and the dam was pronounced safe by the Department of Water and Power. Here is another picture of the dam. Three minutes before midnight on March 12, 1928, the St. Francis Dam catastrophically failed. There were no eyewitnesses to the dam's collapse. A wall of water 125 feet high was quickly released, and 12 billion gallons of water surged down San Francisco Canyon in a dam break wave, demolishing a downstream power station and destroying everything in its path. The flood traveled south down San Francisco Canyon, flooding parts of the present-day towns of Valencia and Newhall. The deluge then turned west into the Santa Clara riverbed, flooding the towns of Bardsdale, Fillmore, and Castaic Junction. The flood continued west and discharged the floodwater and accumulated debris, including drowning victims, into the Pacific Ocean near the town of Montalvo, 54 miles away. When it reached the ocean at about 5:30 a.m. on March 13th, the floodwaters were about 2 miles wide and traveling at a speed of about 5 miles per hour. Bodies of victims were recovered from the Pacific Ocean as far south as the Mexican border. Here is a link to a good online video about the failure that includes computer simulations of the flow of the dam break wave. There is one factual glitch. One of the slides indicates leaks were detected on March 22nd. Actually, they were detected on March 12th. Another picture of the dam. The water you see coming out of the dam in this picture, this is not a leak. This is an outlet works for the dam to release water into the downstream creek. And this is the picture after the dam failed, taken on March 17th, 1928. This is all that was left at the dam site. These were the blocks of concrete that were washed downstream after the dam failure. Note the two men standing in this photo. This gives you an idea of the size of these concrete blocks. This is the former west abutment of the dam. This is a hydroelectric power plant that was located downstream of the dam. Note the two penstocks dropping down the side of the mountain to the plant. This is all that was left of the power plant after the dam collapsed. Note the penstocks are still there, and notice what appears to be two small pieces of machinery where the power plant had been located. This is a picture of those two pieces of machinery. They are the power plant generators. Note their size compared to the men standing nearby. The power plant structure was completely washed away. This is typical flood damage downstream. This was at the town of Santa Paula. For those who would like an in-depth technical analysis of the failure, this is a link to a study done by a professor at the Missouri School of Technology, and it's a good forensic examination of the failure. The dam broke into several large concrete blocks, some of which were carried almost a half-mile downstream, while the center section of the dam remains standing. The upright center section was subsequently demolished. The St. Francis Dam was not rebuilt, although Bouquet Reservoir in nearby Bouquet Canyon and Castaic Dam in the town of Castaic were subsequently built as replacements for the St. Francis Dam. The Los Angeles coroner's inquest concluded the disaster was primarily caused by the unsuitable soil conditions on which the eastern abutment of the dam was built, but which would have been impossible for the geologists of the 1920s to detect. Therefore, the inquest determined responsibility for the disaster lay with the governmental organizations which oversaw the dam's construction and the dam's designer and engineer, a gentleman named Mr. William Mulholland. Here is some of the downstream damage. Railroad tracks displaced, highway damage, now let's look at this in a historical context. This tragic engineering failure needs to be examined within the context of the rapid growth of Los Angeles and what is known as the California Water Wars. This confluence of powerful economic, social, and technological challenges was the essence of this failure. And it was driven by two fundamental ways people think and act: linearly and non-linearly. The water wars began when Frederick Eaton was elected mayor of Los Angeles in 1898 and appointed his associate, William Mulholland, the superintendent of the newly created Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Eaton and Mulholland are said to have had a vision of a Los Angeles that would become far bigger than the Los Angeles of the turn of the century. The limiting factor of Los Angeles's growth was water supply. Eaton and Mulholland realized that the Owens Valley had a large amount of runoff from the Sierra Nevada, and a gravity-fed aqueduct could deliver the Owens water to Los Angeles. At the turn of the century, the United States Bureau of Reclamation was planning on building an irrigation system to help the farmers of the Owens Valley. However, the agent of the Bureau is reported to have been a close friend of Eaton, so Eaton had access to inside information about water rights. Eaton bought land as a private citizen, hoping to sell it back to Los Angeles at a vast profit. Eaton lobbied Theodore Roosevelt and got the local irrigation system canceled. Mulholland misled residents of the Owens Valley by claiming that Los Angeles would take water only for domestic purposes, not for irrigation. By 1905, through purchases and alleged intimidation and bribery, Los Angeles purchased enough water rights to enable construction of the aqueduct. Some argue that Los Angeles paid an unfair price to the farmers of the Owens Valley for their land. However, the sale of their land brought the farmers substantially more income than if they had kept the land for farming and ranching. None of the sales were made under threat of eminent domain. The aqueduct was sold to the citizens of Los Angeles as vital to the growth of the city. However, unknown to the public, the initial water would be used to irrigate the undeveloped San Fernando Valley to the north, which was not at the time a part of the city. A syndicate of investors, again close friends of Eaton, including Harrison Gray Otis, bought up large tracts of land in the San Fernando Valley with this inside information. This syndicate made substantial efforts on behalf of the passage of the bond issue that funded the aqueduct, including publishing articles favorable to the project in the Los Angeles Times, which Otis published. From 1905 through 1913, Mulholland directed the building of the Los Angeles Aqueduct. The 223 miles of Los Angeles Aqueduct, completed in November 1913, has been compared in complexity to building the Panama Canal. Water from the Owens Valley reached its terminal reservoir in the San Fernando Valley on November 5th. The building of the St. Francis Dam was begun a decade later, its primary purpose being to store water for use in drought years. Thus the stage was set for the St. Francis Dam tragedy. Strong political and economic forces were demanding the dam's construction. There was a strong political will to overcome any technical hurdles that might arise. And this is where the human factors and ethical issues came into play. This tragedy is a case study in how people think and act with regard to a course of action to achieve an objective. Although a group or population of people may overtly express a common objective, individuals or subgroups of individuals may have covert objectives. The overt objective of Los Angeles civic leaders was to provide Los Angeles with a safe and reliable water supply. As history now indicates, individual civic leaders may have had covert objectives intended to enhance their personal positions, such as by personal profit. How these civic leaders reacted to the situation illustrates the proposition that people respond fundamentally in two different ways, which have been characterized as that of linear thinkers and nonlinear thinkers. The way people think and act has been said by psychologists and others to fall into these two fundamental categories, linear thinkers and nonlinear thinkers. Some people undoubtedly have characteristics of both categories, but one or the other behavior pattern tends to dominate. Here is how these categories have been described. Linear thinkers are driven by rules. When presented with an issue, they apply recognized and accepted rules and reason logically to a conclusion that is driven by those rules. Engineers are classic examples of linear thinkers. Engineers are trained in engineering schools in the irrefutable laws of applied physics, and they learn a methodology to apply those laws to engineering problems in order to arrive at a correct solution. In engineering practice, engineers are intensely driven by rules in the form of experiential knowledge incorporated into codes, regulations, and accepted best practices. Engineers are not the only examples of linear thinkers. Medical doctors, scientists, and accountants are some of the other typical linear thinkers. Here is a picture of how a linear thinker gets from a problem, point A, to a solution, point B. It's by the application of rules. A linear thinker arrives at point B by logical application of rules, not because point B is a predetermined goal. But this is not how nonlinear thinkers get from point A to perhaps point B or point C or point D, depending upon which is his or her goal. Nonlinear thinkers are not concerned about rules. They are concerned about getting from point A to point C. Point A is the situation with which they are currently confronted, and point C is where they want to be. They are goal-oriented. This is a picture of how nonlinear thinkers arrive at their goal. For example, if a nonlinear thinker is currently a clerk in the mailroom of a large corporation, point A, his goal may be to become chief executive officer of that large corporation, point C. His goal is not to design a big dam, point B. He wants to be chief executive officer of that large corporation. Here is a picture of how a nonlinear thinker gets from where he is now, point A, to where he wants to be, point C. It's with disregard of applicable rules, such as the rules of physics. What motivates public policy makers? Public policy makers, like elected public officials appointed by elected public officials, and higher level civil servants whose careers are driven by appointed and elected officials, are classic nonlinear thinkers. Other examples are retail merchants, advertising executives, performing artists. Public policy makers are goal-oriented. Their goal is usually either to A, get reelected or reappointed to the office or position they now hold, or more likely B, to get elected, appointed to a higher office being one of greater power, authority, and prestige. Their point B is their current position, and their point C is the position to which they aspire. And they will do whatever is necessary to move from A to C. The key policymakers driving the construction of the Los Angeles Aqueduct and St. Francis Dam were Frederick Eaton and William Mulholland. Were they linear or nonlinear thinkers, or some combination thereof? And how might these characteristics have shaped their actions, which led to the St. Francis Dam failure? Frederick Eaton was the principal political force behind the Los Angeles Aqueduct. Born in Los Angeles in 1856 into a prominent Pasadena family, he was the mayor of Los Angeles from 1898 to 1900. He is reported to have taught himself engineering and was the superintendent of the Los Angeles City Water Company by age 19 in 1875. As head of the water company in 1878, Eaton first hired William Mulholland as a ditch digger for distribution canals from the Los Angeles River to the city. William Mulholland has frequently been characterized as a civil engineer, but it's unlikely he would be described as such by current professional standards. Without meaning to lessen his many accomplishments as a public agency manager, by today's professional standards, he would probably be characterized as an engineering technician. Mulholland was born in Ireland in 1855. At the age of 15, he ran off to sea. In 1872, he left the sea and ultimately immigrated to the United States, arriving in Los Angeles in 1877. After arriving in Los Angeles, he accepted a job digging wells. After a brief period in Arizona where he prospected for gold and worked on the Colorado River, he obtained a job from Frederick Eaton as deputy zanjero, a Latin term, with the newly formed Los Angeles Water Company. In Southern California during the Spanish and Mexican administrations, water was delivered to the Pueblo de Los Angeles in a large open ditch called the Saña Madre. The man who tended the ditch was known as a sañero. In 1898, the Los Angeles city government decided to not renew its contract with the Los Angeles Water Company. 4 years later, the Los Angeles Department of Water was established, and Mayor Frederick Eaton arranged for the hiring of Mr. Mulholland as its appointed head. Mulholland, who was described as a, quote, self-taught engineer, laid the foundations that would transform Los Angeles into today's metropolis. In furtherance of that goal, and under his direction, the 233-mile Los Angeles Aqueduct was completed in 1913 to bring water from the Owens Valley to Los Angeles. It would be fair to describe Frederick Eaton and William Mulholland as dominant nonlinear thinkers with lesser linear thinking characteristics. And this was the fatal combination that led to the St. Francis Dam failure. Their strong goal orientation to develop the Los Angeles Aqueduct and the St. Francis Dam overrode the rule-based approach required for prudent completion of major engineering projects. Now we get to the ethical issues. The investigation that was undertaken after the dam failure was headed by the Los Angeles coroner. The coroner's inquest found that the failure of the St. Francis Dam was due to three factors. First, unsatisfactory soil conditions at the site. Second, failure to compensate for the additional 20 feet added to the height of the dam. And third, the fact the design and construction was overseen by only one person, Mulholland. Here is how the issues presented by the St. Francis Dam failure might be described. Shortly after the failure, Mulholland publicly accepted that the blame was his alone. The project was closely controlled and directed by Mulholland with support from his mentor Eaton. Eaton, as indicated, had been described as having, quote, taught himself engineering, and Mulholland was described as, quote, a self-taught engineer. Investing responsibility for major engineering projects in self-taught engineers is questionable, if not irresponsible. If society does not accept self-taught physicians, self-taught nuclear physicists, or self-taught airline pilots, it's difficult to understand how it can be reasonable for self-taught engineers to be in control of major engineering projects where risks of personal injury and property damage are often great. Knowledge of the science of soil mechanics in general was sparse at the time, and knowledge of soil conditions at the site was limited because of insufficient exploration and testing. Appropriate rules-based technical leadership, which is the essence of professional engineering training, would have had to conclude that the theoretical and experiential knowledge base available for the project was inadequate to build the dam, at least without substantial additional research, exploration, and testing of the soils at the site. Instead, goal-based leadership, the idea to get the project built, controlled, and the dam was constructed. The record indicates Mulholland was dominantly, if not completely, in control of the project, and there was little diversity, that is, involvement of additional professional engineers in decision making, particularly when the theoretical and experiential knowledge bases are as sparse as they were at the time the St. Francis Dam was designed and constructed. Diversity of technical input should be strongly encouraged. That is, multiple qualified professional engineers should have been involved in the decision-making process through internal reviews and outside consultations. Hindsight is, of course, a wonderful thing. The civil engineering professional has learned much from the St. Francis Dam failure, both technically and procedurally. There are, however, lessons that should be restated and carried forward to future projects. Substantive engineering projects and programs must be controlled by competent engineering professionals. There will be times with all engineering projects and programs when the state of technical knowledge, both theoretical and experiential, can conflict with the project goals, i.e., get the project done. These conflicts need to be controlled and managed by engineering professionals with appropriate training and experience. Engineering professionals responsible for a project must have full and final authority on all engineering decisions. Next, those in control of substantive engineering projects and programs must have professional engineering training and experience. Technical experience alone is insufficient. Professional training and experience is essential because it teaches a rule-based approach to engineering projects, not merely a selection of technical rules. The St. Francis Dam failure is a clear example of project leadership that had insufficient professional training and experience, i.e., it was being done by self-taught engineers. Engineering professionals should have training and experience in implementing substantive engineering projects and programs in an environment in which nonlinear thinkers may be influential or even dominant. Engineering professionals need training and experience in working within organizations, companies, and agencies where goal-oriented nonlinear thinkers are influential or even dominant. They need the interpersonal skills that are essential to implementing substantive engineering projects and programs that fall prudently within the scope of available theoretical and experiential knowledge. These skills can be held to prevent the ascension of unqualified persons to positions of control over engineering decisions. And that brings us to the end of our allotted time. I want to thank you for letting me chat with you today. I hope you found this brief discussion interesting and perhaps a little informative, and that it will give you something to think about as you move forward and address projects that come across your desk in the future. With that, let me close things out and wish you all to have a nice rest of the day. Thanks a lot. Bye.